Yeah, thanks everybody for joining in to this webinar about AI and automation. My partner Joanna is going to take you through this quick half an hour where we're going to present our AI and automation whiteboard and talk about one specific case study. In case you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat here in Zoom. We're going to do a little Q&A session afterwards. And before we actually get going, the only thing that I would like to mention still is that I just saw a study yesterday that was done by Morgan Stanley and Salesforce, where apparently Salesforce reported that with their new AI and automation solution, they can deflect 90% of call center calls from humans away to AI and automation, which I think is a rather very impressive number that can be handled by systems like this. And at the same time, I think it also shows why we are diving into the topic and why we think it's super interesting for companies to explore that further. But that's it from my side. And then, Joanna, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Steph. Thank you, everybody, for joining. As Steph said before, if you have any questions, please just drop them in the chat. Fabiola will be keeping track, and even within 30 minutes, I hope that we'll be able to cover them. So just a little bit of an overview of what we're going to be able to provide you with afterwards. We will be providing the video, and we will be providing this kind of like full-scale Miro board, which is basically a replication of whiteboards and Post-its that you can literally copy paste from this Miro board into whatever workshops or sessions you're doing with your teams, with your company, to see if generative AI combined with automation is a solution for some of the processes in your company. They are very much designed to be copy pasted or actually reproduced as whiteboards for brainstorming sessions, Post-its included. And actually each whiteboard comes with a set of instructions about what is the goal, what do you want the outcome to be, who should be included, and how you should maybe like some tips and tricks for running the process. But then the content from the webinar itself is going to be here. So just to add on a little bit to what Steph was saying, so we are a strategy and implementation company. But as such, we always have our eyes out for any kind of like new enabling technology that can actually help us with some of our business operations, our clients' business operations, and to actually get a little bit more done more efficiently with fewer resources. We are not de facto believers of, let's say, generative AI replacing strategic thinking. And some of the use cases that we're going to be talking about, I guess I would categorize them in the group of boring, but they're really use cases about where process, not a great deal of, let's say, human thinking intervention actually creates a lot of value, but being able to automate with the latest technological tools, a lot of the processes that companies and teams go through that could actually benefit from automation and these new technologies. So, like I said, the Miro board that we're going to be able to share was going to have a little bit of information about us, an overview about how to define actually then where AI and automation can actually help you with your processes, and how to design, how to create priorities about where you want to apply some of these things, your most relevant use cases for these technologies, and then also like the how-to whiteboards to set it up. And then just like a little bit of a background before we go, because we think like there are a million different use cases, a million different scenarios, and a lot of different tools that anybody can use, because the use cases and the situations for every company, excuse me, is going to be different. What we wanted to share with you in these 30 minutes is actually kind of like a thinking process to make those decisions. How do you define where to start? How do you actually create priorities? What is kind of an ideation and prototyping process that you could go through to start implementing these tools? Because since the dawn of, let's say, ChatGPT that got everybody buzzing, what's been going on in the last couple of years is actually the creation and the launch of a lot of interesting plug and play platforms, tools, and apps that are able to integrate a lot of the different technologies and softwares that are actually out there for pretty much anybody to be able to implement these processes and these workflows into their organization. I'm going to start with like a little bit of a use case, because then the process and the framework for actually making or starting an AI and automation process, I think it'll put it into context. So I think starting with a use case is going to be useful. So we are co-owners of a company called SignMesh, and SignMesh is a subscription-based online platform for sharing micro trends in technology, consumer behavior, media, and marketing in general. What the platform does and the way that it worked is we do primary and secondary research to look to see what's trending. We summarize those trends, we format them, we make them really beautiful in terms of a piece of content. It is published in a content management system. And from that content management system, we give access to our clients so they can be totally up to date about what's going on in their worlds, but also to create newsletters for inspiration and information about the latest trends and reports that we publish and use as our own content marketing. And to give you an idea about how we used to do that, we actually went through manual trends research that would be looking for links. Then we would actually manually summarize those and format them in a really nice way. We would upload them to our content management system and tag it. We would then kind of cluster the ones that we thought were interesting. From those, generate newsletters and reports, and then actually publish them in social media and to subscribers. Then we would manually go back and look at the analytics to see what was interesting, and then kind of reshape kind of like the newsletter for the content for the newsletter and the next reports, depending on the feedback that we're getting from our analytics. This is a process that would generally take about 109 people hours per week. This was done this was a daily event, it was daily work, and the publishing was going on a regular basis. With the AI and automation tools that we actually integrated into this process, we've reduced it down to 22 people hour per week. That means that the entire team that was working on this is able to actually devote an additional 87 hours to our client work, more strategic work, let's say for the heavier lifting kind of work that we do. So we found it very useful in this case, and I think it'll put it in context when we take you through the whiteboards. Workflows kind of look like this. I'm not going to go into detail, but when you plug in some of these platforms and kind of link it with the existing software that you have, whether it's taking a link and then summarizing it, then putting it into Excel, then using some sort of like image generating and formatting tools to make a beautiful piece of content to it, and then publish it, you actually see in these platforms almost like an open brain of how these workflows work. And they're actually not very difficult to do. Like I said, the use cases are a lot for these kind of more process-oriented things. There is no unimportant thing in business, but some things could actually be automated to save time. And I think SignMesh is an example of content marketing. You might use it for customer queries and customer service when it makes sense. Financial administration, I don't think anybody really enjoys doing their accounting or processing administrative things every month or every week. You can plug it into your CRM systems for lead generation, follow-ups, customer contact. So the use cases are many, but we wanted to share with you then, okay, how do you start? How do I start playing around with these things? How do I decide what's a good starting point? So the kind of whiteboards that we've put together are based on some very kind of like design thinking and kind of like a sprint mentality. And it all starts by listing the jobs to be done, which basically means take a list, make a list with your team about all the stuff that you do that tends to be manual, that tends to be repetitive. Then you map a very granular journey of what exactly needs to be done, who does it, with what information, with what tools, what is actually in the same way that we actually map customer journeys. You would actually then like map a task journey. And these can get very intricate and very granular, because when you step back and you think about what actually needs to be done, you're going to get a pretty detailed journey. And that journey will help you to decide where you want to automate. Then the next step would be to to generate some ideas about how that automation could be done. Sketching actually kind of like a workflow, a two-dimensional drawing, very much like a wireframe, and then develop a roadmap for your iterations. And these are the whiteboards that we've set up for you. So the first whiteboard that you might want to replicate in your office, in your conference room, is actually the jobs to be done. And there you just kind of want to have top of line a listing of the jobs to be done that you spend quite a lot of time on, but you do it on a repetitive basis, like finding trends, summarizing them, publishing them, creating reports out of them, creating content like newsletters. A job to be done, if you're not familiar with the framework, look it up. It's actually a pretty good one. But just kind of like with your team, what are the jobs to be done that you do on a regular basis? So we need to do trends monitoring so that we can actually publish our content management system, which is a subscription service, and generate content marketing for our own marketing and actually sharing some of these inspirations. So that's the job to be done. Any kind of job to be done can be defined in terms of inputs, raw data. We actually need the research, processing, summarizing, formatting, and then outputs would be reports, newsletters, right? So any kind of like workflow basically has these things. So the first thing that you want to do is list your jobs, the ones that you think could be ready for automation, and do a very, very, very top line journey mapping of what exactly is done by your team to where they get the inputs from, how do they find them, what processing needs to be done, and then what kind of output needs to be generated. And then like in any kind of thing that you would do actually with a lot of problem solving situations, you want to kind of list the pains and the gains associated with those. When you do this kind of breakdown, kind of like brain dump, you'll get an idea about which one of these actually creates the most time or takes away time from your more daily activities, which ones are very labor intensive, which ones are not necessarily so much fun to do manually. And then you'll be able to kind of then estimate how many hours it takes to actually get this thing done currently as it is. And from there, when you do it for a couple of your jobs, you'll be able to see which ones are actually pretty good candidates for automation and the use of like generative AI technology, the ones that are actually are good candidates and also take up a lot of your time. And then you'll have a bit of a ranking. Good. Like I said, 109 hours per week was like, hey, we should probably think about doing that in a more, let's say, automated way. The next step is actually then to take your job to be done and to get more granular, because only when you start doing, when you get really, really detailed into your journey, then you will get an idea of what kind of functions you're looking from your technology and what kind of apps are available out there to do that. So like, for instance, for us, it was like really like, you know, you get a link with an interesting trend because you've done your research online. That needs to be published into some sort of storage system. For us, it was Slack and some Trello boards. From then it needs to be prioritized and pulled. Then it needs to be actually kind of then summarized. That was done manually. So somebody actually do a summary of it. Then we had to find images to actually include in the summary and all kinds of other things. So we mapped it out really granularly, what was being done from that process of finding research and publishing around it. And then we also just captured, so we have it on the whiteboard, what are the tools that we're currently using that we would want to integrate into our automation workflows. We use Slack. We didn't want to give up Slack. We had like some Trello boards and some other Kanban tools. We didn't want to give those up. Those were integrated into our process. And then, of course, we also wanted to capture very, very specific practical constraints. For us, those things were like, we didn't want to use any images that were to actually enrich the content that were breaking any kind of IP ethics or privacy. So we, for instance, like one of our constraints was that it had to be things that were from Creative Commons and free use kind of content. We had very specific constraints, like, because when you write down the constraints, you'll be able to give better commands to these little apps, right? The constraints were like, we needed a summary that was maximum 3 paragraphs. Those paragraphs had to be separated by a space. They had to be done in American English, not UK English. We wanted them to be a mix of long sentences and shorter sentences and not use very sophisticated language, but very down to earth language. So those types of practical constraints will really help you when you're starting to automate these things, because it'll help you determine your prompts, your commands, and basically how you define what you want the machine to do. So we've done jobs to be done. We've selected our number one candidate to actually go deeper into. We do a very granular journey of what's done in that process when it's done manually. We list the tools that we want to, that we already have and we want to keep, and we make sure that we always have those constraints there. The third step is the prioritization. So when you actually do a very detailed journey of your task journey by your task masters and the people that are involved in actually this work that's being done, you'll see that it's actually a little bit bigger than your thought, because when you start mapping it out in detail, there's a lot of details in there that you don't think about when you're just talking about it in the big picture context. That's why having this very detailed journey is really important. Then you'll be able to realize of like, how much can you bite? You know, you don't want to bite off more than you can chew. You'll get an idea of where you want to start. Are you ready to actually start playing around with tools and capabilities and software for the entire process, that entire thing that you want to do, from finding trends to creating reports that are published on a regular basis? Do you want to tackle one part of it, or a very, maybe just the processing part? Maybe you wanted, like with us, for instance, it started like, we don't want to do the entire thing. We don't want to necessarily start with automating report generation or content creation and publishing it. We wanted to start with actually just doing the summaries and the formatting of the trends. That was as much as we could handle in, let's say, our first experiments. Or you might start with something even smaller than that, like you need to summarize very long articles into 2 pages, right? On a regular basis. You might just start with that kind of like automation tools that just do very good summaries of long format content. Once you prioritize which part of your process you want to play around, then it's really, you know, you've got it, you've got your detailed journey, you have your tools listed, you have your constraints listed, and then it's really time to start kind of ideating about what you want to do. And when you're ideating, it's kind of like these days with, as always with technology, it's kind of like the ideation part becomes a little bit of a wish list. Like, God, if I could just close my eyes and have let's say, have this trend from a 2-page article or a 5-page report summarized into 3 paragraphs. If I could just close my eyes and do that, wouldn't that be really cool? So this is kind of like the ideation process. You know, I would like the summaries to be actually shorter. I would like to be able to automate some part of my trends research based on keywords. So you start thinking how you might improve the overall process. You start thinking about how you might want to enhance it. So for instance, you say, oh, I don't want to have just always like, if I'm publishing a trend, wouldn't it be cool if I could enhance it with video rather than actually images, right? So how can I create videos out of this? And then you might start thinking about what you want to automate. And that's really important to do with your team, because they'll be able to tell you what they want to get off their desk, literally. Like, it takes me 45 minutes to summarize a short article. It takes me 2 hours to summarize a longer report. I really wish I could do that more quickly so I could move on to other things. So once you have your journey and the thing that you want to automate, you think about how can you improve it, that entire process, how can you enhance it and elevate it to a new level with AI, and how can you actually automate it. So that would be step number 3. Step number 4 really comes down to sketching. So I have this process, I want to automate a part of it. I have my wish list of things that could be done better, faster, with more quality or equal quality but with fewer human resources, then you can start thinking about almost like a wireframe process where you've got your journey here. And then you start thinking, what are the key functions to be performed? I want something to grab the link that I put in Slack, to be able to push it into a prioritization Excel sheet. What tools do I need to do that? I need to be able to pull my prioritized trends from the Excel sheet, put it into some sort of like app that is able to summarize it in the way that I want. Oh, ChatGPT would be really cool for that. I want to create, let's say, images based on copyright-free kind of content out there. Let me see if there's generative AI visualization tool that can help me do that, right? So you've mapped out what you want to automate. What do you want to be done? And then you can start sifting through the tools that are available that will help you to get that done. So this is kind of like a sketching of something like this, right? If I do this, then I want it to go here. I want it to do that. Then I want to send it here. Once it's here, I want it to be grabbed by this app and to be able and process it this way. Then I want to send it here again. Then I want to email it. Then I want to publish it on LinkedIn, right? So you're sketching the entire process, and you don't have to be a developer to do this. You don't have to be a UXer. You kind of know what needs to be done, so you can sketch it. And then the final thing is just like, it's good once you have your little process, you found your tools, you know what functions and functionalities you need, you know what the system needs to do. You have the tools listed that you want to play around with. And in kind of like an agile process, you can't see around corners, but you can do a little bit of planning around it. So what we've included as the last step is to map out for yourself a little bit of, let's say, a roadmap of iterations. So let's say for us, the first iteration that we did was proper before we started generating reports and doing social media content publishing and all of the automated analytics and the learnings. Like the first thing that we wanted to make sure is that generative AI was actually summarizing our content correctly. And it seems kind of, very simple, but it's an iteration and it's the first prototype that we went through as one part of that workflow. And it took quite a bit of tweaking and we got a lot of learning about it. This is what you want to do with your prototype, right? You want to build something and you want to see if it works well. And then you tweak it so that it can work better if you find anything that needs to be tweaked. For instance, we had a lot of problems in the beginning with the obvious hallucinations from the generative AI. It was very simple. We were sending to a generative AI app a link to an original source, which talked about the trend. And then we realized that actually the generative AI was not reading the content of the link, but every single link inside the link. So this whole thing with LLMs, it was just searching all over the place to be able to do a summary. And the learning for us after a few iterations was that we just copy paste or it needs to grab the original text, not the link and all the other metadata that's embedded in the link, to get a proper summary without hallucination. So that was iteration number one. The second one was playing around with the images. The third one was actually creating a newsletter that was automated, integrating some of our tools like MailChimp in addition to other tools that we found. So the process was kind of complete. So this is it. Steph has found in his experience with actually doing this stuff hands-on, a lot of interesting tools, a lot of different approaches. And because like most of the questions that we always face is what's out there? How do I start? And this kind of like say design thinking way we found to actually be valuable. Get the people in the room that are actually doing it, actually just define or map the status quo of how a process is being done manually, re-engineer it or reimagine it in a more perfect, ideal, enhanced way, draw that, of what that process might look like, and then explore tools that can help you. And then I would say again, since the launch of this technology, there have been so many platforms, apps that are now interoperable, can work together with your existing tech stack, are literally plug and play. They're all based on, this very intuitive interface, which was like the true innovation behind ChatGPT, is that you actually just give commands in English, you tell the machine what to do, and it does it. It doesn't require a lot of technical skill, let's say, but it requires patience, and it requires, I think, a good amount of planning and thinking up front before you roll up your sleeves to get working. And it does require knowledge about the availability of what's out there, because there's more than you can imagine. But thinking about your particular use cases, we think is the most important place to start, because doing a little bit of thinking up front so saves you actually a lot of time in the end. So we have designed, and if you go to actually the webpage on this, we've created kind of like a self-assessment test, or like, are you ready for AI and automation opportunities with your teams or with your company? It's a pretty good survey. It takes just a few minutes to complete. It's about 5 minutes, some basic questions about what you currently do, what capabilities exist with your teams, what would you like to save time and resources on. It'll create a report identifying kind of like the top 3 opportunities for you to get going. And you can actually find it online with us. You'll get the report. And also you're welcome to contact Stefan or myself to an intro session. It is free of charge, which goes more into detail about the opportunities out there currently to actually leverage these new enabling technologies. Quite a lot more use cases, and probably a little bit more detail about how to get started with AI and automation design sprints to integrate it into your team or to your company. And that's it from my side. I'm not sure if we have any questions. We don't technically have a lot of time, but if we do have questions, we would be more than happy to take them on. So hope this added value. I think it's something that needs to be digested, hence the full content of the Miro board will be available with a lot more detail and a little bit more, let's say, guidelines or suggested guidelines about how to go through this process. We hope it adds value to your day, to your work, and you get some inspiration to start playing around with it.
Thank you, Joanna. That was actually perfect in time.